Like so many others, I went to see the Barbie movie on opening weekend, and like many others, I was surprised at what I saw. When I first heard of this movie, I thought, God, Hollywood has sunk to new lows. But then I found I had a growing interest, and it had everything to do with the smart marketing of the movie. Keeping the actual plot a mystery, playing to the nostalgia of ladies of all ages, and having Margot Robbie dress in the hottest Barbie fashion for all of the promotions was genius. In the days leading up to the movie, critics were beginning to release their thoughts on the movie. Most of the critics I prefer to watch on YouTube are men, and they all pretty much had the same thing to say. This movie is all about feminism and the feminist message. Some said it with some grace, and others said it with disgust, but it did give me some expectations going into the film. Jeremy Johns was likely the most polite reviewer I saw. Disparu claimed the movie hates its audience. Ben Shapiro chose to destroy Barbie for 43 minutes. And The Critical Drinker described the movie as bitter, spiteful dog shit that hates men. I don't even think the drinker used his drunk voice for that review. He genuinely seemed angry about a movie he wasted his time on. Now, I've been a fan of The Drinker for a long time, so I'm gonna pick on him for a minute. Also, his arguments are the most concise. I'm not gonna go through his videos step by step, but rather give my own experience and throw in some of his views. I'll admit, I was not prepared for the in your face feminism that was radiating out of the screen right from the start. I'm not against a feminist message that supports women without putting down men, but the first act of this movie seems to do just that. And as I watched it, I kept thinking, okay. But it finally started clicking as the movie continued that the intent was that the feminist message was supposed to be over the top. It actually serves as the driving force for Ken's character arc throughout the entire movie. In the second act, where Barbie and Ken end up in the real world, misogyny seems to be everywhere. It's not just men and women going about their lives, it's douches on the beach making uncomfortable comments at Barbie, or construction workers catcalling Barbie. I come from a family of construction workers, so I wanted to roll my eyes at the outdated trope, but the movie has a strong premise of everything is a stereotype, and catcalling construction workers are pretty stereotypical of a heavily patriarchal society. In any case, the feminism and patriarchy both get so out of control that by the end of the movie, the character realized that neither men or women should be elevated by keeping the other down. Overall, I think that's a pretty good message. But I can see where guys were either too annoyed to pick up on that by the end or just didn't get it. There are definitely some lines added into the movie that make it seem as though the Kens of Barbie Land are still going to be kept under the matriarchal thumb, but these lines are actually in reference to the slow, step by step ascent women have had for decades, gradually working towards gender equality. Personally, I got it and I appreciated it. Let's start at the beginning, where Barbie is doing the 2001 Space Odyssey thing. The narrator describes how little girls only had baby dolls to play with, and the girls look pretty bored. Now, the drinker takes this scene as one where the movie is telling little girls it is terrible to be a mother. While the baby doll smashing was a bit harsh for my taste, I didn't get the message from the movie that little girls playing mommy was wrong, especially since there are plenty of opportunities to play mommy with Barbie dolls. I will say that from my own experience as a little girl, there was definitely a transition for me between baby dolls and Barbies. Baby dolls are given to toddlers because they're larger and don't have tiny accessories that a kid can put in their mouth. My mom started buying me Barbies once I got past the choking hazard age. Once I had Barbie dolls, I preferred them to my baby dolls. Not because I didn't want to play mommy or house, but because there were so many possibilities with Barbie dolls that baby dolls just didn't have. Prior to Barbies, girls had paper dolls once they grew out of baby dolls. Barbie is a better, more long lasting version of that. The movie continues giving exposition via narrator, and we see an average day in stereotypical Barbie's life. This is where that over the top feminist message comes in, and I'm pretty sure this is where the male critics checked out of looking for any other meaning in the movie. Now, I was sitting in a theater that was about half men, and throughout the movie, they were laughing along with some of the dumb jokes thrown in and seemed to be genuinely engaged with the film. Nobody got up and left pissed off mid-movie just because of feminist messaging, and that's saying something because I live in the heart of the South where you would think masculinity would reign supreme and feminism would be squashed at every turn. I admit, I myself was struggling a little bit with how strong the feminist message was, particularly the discussion about how the matriarchy in Barbie Land had solved all the problems for women in the real world. Then I remembered all of the commercials and marketing from Mattel about Barbies over the past few decades, and some of the controversies surrounding the doll's unrealistic expectations for little girls, and I realized the movie wasn't blasting a man-hating feminist message, but rather giving us some satire on how Mattel's marketing campaign for their dolls have been an insufferable, unrealistic band aid to some of the problems women have faced over the years. By the Barbies believing they've solved problems for women in the real world, they get to live in their own little utopian bubble. And that bubble includes Barbies holding every job imaginable, while Kens are just on the beach waiting for their Barbies to pay attention to them. This is where most male critics lose their minds. Never mind that for decades in our history, this is how women were portrayed on television and treated in real life. But, honestly, that argument is actually irrelevant here because the movie is about Barbies. I don't know how much playtime these male critics have had with Barbies, but given that my childhood was full of Barbie paraphernalia, I want to shed some light on this. Barbie was always the central focus for little girls to play with. Go to any store and you will see Barbie doing every occupation under the sun. I had multiple types of Barbies, a few different Skippers, a couple of Stacy's, but I only had one Ken doll. And that one Ken doll was the only guy I used, if I used a guy, in any of my playing with Barbies and the accessories. My Ken doll was straight out of the 80s, with crazy print neon swim trunks and neon yellow shoes. He never had a shirt on, or had any other clothes for that matter, and I didn't care enough about Kens to dress him or get him some guy friends. I was a little girl who wanted to play with a girl doll, and I think this is how a lot of little girls view Barbie and play with their Barbie dolls. Think what you like about the messaging of the movie, but this first act of the movie was extremely reflective of how Barbies get played with by countless little girls every day. And before anybody loses their shit about this, I want to point out that I didn't play with guy dolls with my baby dolls either. Not because I didn't want to, but because they weren't available. It took my mom years of searching to find a little boy baby doll for me to have because they just didn't make them. Girls playing with baby dolls apparently should only want girl dolls. But then along comes Barbie, and it is primarily girl dolls again. And if we take a closer look at kids' toys over the years, none of my brother's G.I. Joe collection had a female component. For decades, toys were highly gendered, so why is it so hard to think that a movie based on a traditional girl's toy would lean heavily into a matriarchal theme in Barbie Land? Well, instead of thinking about it like that, our male critics just immediately chalk it up to men hating women in Hollywood blasting their awful feminist message to audiences everywhere. As I sat and watched the first act of this movie, I felt like the message was really strong, cringy in spots. but not wholly inaccurate as I thought about how I played with my Barbies as a little girl. There was something much bigger in the movie that I could never have prepared myself for, something that stuck with me long after the movie was over, and something that sort of shocked me about this movie. That something was the heaviness of Barbie's existential crisis. Seeing the previews, I figured Barbie would go through an existential crisis by figuring out she was a doll and then wanting to go see the real world. As it turns out, she knows she's a doll. Then, Barbie starts having very real, very serious human feelings. This leads her to go to the real world to try to reconcile these feelings. This aspect of the movie brought an unexpected depth to what I thought would be a super lighthearted film. That's not to say this is a bad direction to take the film, but it certainly was unpredictable in terms of what I thought I was getting. Barbie's scary existential crisis leads her to want to go to the real world, and Ken decides to tag along. The point of Barbie going to the real world in the first place is to find the little girl who's playing with her and figure out what the existential crisis is all about. Many movie critics have an issue with this connection between the Barbies and the girls who play with them because, as we all know, Barbies really go through it in the real world. Kate McKinnon's Weird Barbie is supposed to explain what happens to Barbies who are played with too hard. Since the movie's PG-13, I'm sure it couldn't show limbs being ripped off or dogs mauling a Barbie, but I think we're supposed to assume that the Barbies who are abused in the real world do exist in Barbie Land. Once in the real world, Barbie and Ken get introduced to the patriarchy. Again, some of this scene is way over the top and cringy, but some of it's actually realistic. The drinker points out that it seems very unlikely that a guy would come up and slap Barbie's ass in the middle of the day, in front of her boyfriend. Given how many times I have been groped, grabbed, and touched just doing simple things like grocery shopping in the middle of the day, I actually thought this was a normal thing to add in. I know the drinker and the guys in his circle think this stuff doesn't happen anymore, but it's actually a pretty common occurrence. It's something many women face regularly, and passing it off as feminist bullshit in his video lets me know this is not something he deals with in his everyday life. Maybe he is a nice enough gentleman to not touch a woman inappropriately, but there are quite a few men out there who are not. I've had men tell me to smile in a store, follow me around the store while I was trying to ignore them, and then follow me to my car and scream at me what a frigid bitch I am because they were just trying to be nice. This happened more than once, actually, with the last incident occurring just a few weeks ago. It is a real thing, and I'm sorry male movie critics don't like seeing it in a film, but it is a reflection of what I see in the real world and what many women see in the real world. So, again, I thought it was normal in the movie. From my personal experience, I would have gone directly to construction workers because my entire family works in construction and I've always found comfort in being around construction workers. They make me feel protected and safe. I was a bit disappointed that this movie relied heavily on the stereotype of catcalling construction workers because it's been my experience that they would take up for women if they thought ass slapping douche nozzles were bothering a woman. However, we do get the stereotype, and I'm sure there are women out there who can relate to that. As Barbie is looking for the girl who plays with her, Ken discovers the patriarchy and decides to fully embrace it. He lacks knowledge of how to do anything because in Barbie Land, all he did was beach. That being said, he misunderstands patriarchy and thinks that just because he's a man, he can do anything. As he goes around in the real world, he just assumes he can take over jobs without training because he's a guy. He gets shut down everywhere he goes because he doesn't have the training. This is actually a proper message from the movie against the feminist message. Really extreme feminists have this weird idea that men get whatever they want because they are men and women don't have that equality. This is a good scene of the film that shows that in the real world, men have to work to achieve the positions they are in. They have to have training. They have to have education. They don't just get these positions simply because they are men. I actually thought this was a pro male message, supporting the hard work that male doctors and executives put in to get where they are. But most of the male critics I've seen review the film seem to just gloss over this scene without thought. When Ken realizes he can't get these jobs in the real world, he decides to take the patriarchy back to Barbie Land, where he doesn't need training for anything. It's worth pointing out that the reason Ken is even drawn to these ideas in the first place is because he's virtually ignored in the Barbie world. Again, this is somewhat reflective of how little girls might play with the dolls. It certainly reflects how I played with them. But it gives Ken a character. A real man hating movie would have just left the Kens as mindless, thoughtless robots. Instead, this movie gives Ken feelings, and you understand why he wants to see a change in his society in Barbie Land. Given that Greta Gerwig is the writer and director, I'm pretty sure this is her idea of flipping the script or turning the tables. In other words, this is reflective of how women may have felt for decades, seen only as objects waiting for a man to notice them and fulfilling a man's needs as their own life purpose. I can only imagine male critics hate seeing this in a movie because it really doesn't feel too good. So, Ken gets the patriarchy back to Barbie Land, and every male stereotype is fulfilled, from taking over the dream houses and not keeping anything clean to having an obsession with the Godfather. Honestly, the only movie that would have made more sense here is if it was Big Trouble in Little China, because every man I've ever met is obsessed with that movie, and every woman I've ever met just doesn't see the appeal. Nonetheless, the Kens take the patriarchy to the extreme, ruining Barbie Land. When Barbie makes her way back with the real world ladies she's connected to, she's horrified at seeing her utopia destroyed. And that's what Barbie Land was, her utopia. All of the Barbies seem to be brainwashed into wanting to be the man pleasing stereotypes, and this is one of the bigger issues I take with the movie. It doesn't do a good job explaining why the Barbies were brainwashed by the Kens. Is that to say that deep down women want to be submissive to men, and Ken bringing back the patriarchy just brought that side out? I don't really know. It happened because the plot needed it to happen, but it really doesn't make any sense, and neither does The Cure. Apparently, America Ferrera delivering a feminist rant is enough to snap the Barbies out of their brainwashing. While myself, and I'm sure other women, can certainly relate to the societal pressures she lists off as being a woman, it still doesn't make sense to me why that would snap the Barbies out of their stupor. I guess because the plot needs it to happen that way. Whatever. Anyway, the Barbies snap out of it and trick the Kens into fighting themselves so they can restore Barbie Land to the way it was, and we come to the climatic moment when Barbie and Ken finally have a real talk. The conclusion is that neither society, female dominated or male dominated, is functional, fair, or appropriate. Barbie encourages her Ken to separate himself from her and actually do a journey of self discovery. I don't consider that a man hating feminist message. I actually think it's pretty encouraging. Everybody should be their own person and not have their identity wrapped up in someone else. But again, our male critics gloss over this. Instead, they write this part of the movie off as, oh, the Barbies took back over and the men are once again under the thumb of the matriarchy. But that's not what happens. Barbie dolls are designed to have varying occupations. Each of the Barbies in Barbie Land are fulfilling these occupations, and as Barbie Land was restored, they wanted to go back to those occupations. The Kens specifically ask if they have to go back to just doing beach, and the Barbies specifically tell them no, they can become what they like. I think the line our male critics are referring to is the line where one of the Kens asks the Barbie president if he can sit on the Supreme Court and she says no. But the Kens can be district judges because, like in the real world, they have to start somewhere. This is a direct reference to the journey women have had to hold predominantly male seats in the US court system. The first federal female judge was appointed in 1928, while the first female district judge was appointed in 1949. But a woman was not appointed to the Supreme Court until 1981, over 30 years later. Women have had a slow ascent toward gender equality in certain job occupations, and this movie just highlighted that. But instead of recognizing that particular plight in our history, the drinker simply writes it off as being bitter, spiteful dog shit. And most of his nearly 2 million subscribers likely agrees with him because it doesn't feel too good when it happens to you. All of that being said, there was a very emotional and heavy moment at the end of the film that didn't have anything to do with the feminist message, and it really hit home for me and my childhood of playing with Barbies. And that brings me to my final takeaway from this movie. No matter what message you get from the movie, if you grew up playing with Barbies, there are so many parts of the film you will appreciate. I think we all knew the sets were amazing. It's Barbie toys come to life. But the acting, oh my god. The Barbies and Kens in Barbie Land move like dolls. Like the way they pose or sit. I can see my Barbies sitting or standing the same way when I had them scattered all over my bedroom floor. The nostalgia is real in this movie, and I loved every minute of it. There is a part of the movie where the executives of Mattel were talking about Skipper escaping from Barbie Land once before, and she showed up in Key West trying to break into a family's home so she could look after their 3 children and take them surfing. Without thinking, I just blurted out, "Babysitter Skipper!" in the middle of the theater, and the older couple sitting next to me busted out laughing. I had Babysitter Skipper with her felt outfit that the little Velcro triplets would stick to. They showed a picture of her at the end, and I told the couple that was my doll. And FYI, my mom didn't get to have many Barbies when she was growing up, so I had every iteration of Barbie up until I was like 12. The collection was huge, and half of it was in this film. I'm here for it. It gave me all the warm feels. And as far as the over the top feminism at the beginning of the movie, it directly matched how I, as a little girl, played with my Barbies. It was a toy made for little girls, and the feminist messaging was really just a lot of the phrasing that has been used to advertise Barbies on commercials for years. Here is a doll that is not a baby doll that can do anything, be anything, and show that girls can grow up into women and aspire to do anything and be anything. I know there are a lot of people out there who will get mad because body positive Barbie is in the film and wheelchair Barbie is in the film and Barbies of all races and job occupations are in the film and Ken dolls take a backseat to Barbies. But this is what this toy has always been, and I'm sure this is what it has been for myself as well as many little girls out there. I had dozens of Barbies, all races, sizes, and abilities, with occupations that span the entire spectrum. It was nice for me to see that the element of play that Barbie had for me as a kid was brought into this movie. Overall, while the movie wasn't what I thought it was going to be, it was still a decent watch. I love Margot Robbie, and there is not a more perfect actress for this role. Ryan Gosling was perfect for the main Ken, but it was also fun to see him go up against Simu Liu's Ken in the most ridiculous ways. Kate McKinnon did a great job as Weird Barbie, the Barbie that is played with too hard, and I was glad to see that she played the role as Weird Barbie and not Kate McKinnon pushing weirdness too far, as she can sometimes do. Loved that Michael Cera played Alan, a doll everybody forgets about. I especially enjoyed the moment when Barbie encouraged Ken to find his own personality not connected to her or the beach, but simply discover who he is. I think that's a good message to bring into the conclusion to balance the strong feminism. The film doesn't seem to take itself too seriously, even taking little moments to make fun of itself. I laughed a lot during this film, as did the packed theater I was in. So I feel like the general audience, not critics, not Hollywood buffs, not people who think they are the be all end all of movie knowledge, just the general audience, I think they enjoyed the film. But that's just my opinion. You think what you like.